Breaking news flash, an unidentified influenza virus has recently emerged in M-City, demonstrating high contagiousness. The origin of the virus remains unknown, and we urge all citizens to take preventive measures and stay at home until the government issues further instructions. Norm was comfortably lounging on the plush sofa, his phone screen streaming a TV drama he had spent considerable time locating. Just as he tore open a bag of chips, an urgent news alert abruptly interrupted his viewing. He sighed, a wave of unease washing over him. "Damn it, what's happening to this world?" he muttered to himself, feeling a surge of powerlessness. Last month, there were reports of several states being ravaged by tornadoes. A few days ago, a country had discharged nuclear wastewater into the ocean. And now, this mysterious virus had appeared. "This world is becoming more and more chaotic," he grumbled, continuing to nibble on his snacks and watch the TV drama. At this moment, he was undisturbed in his solitude, a sanctuary not even God could intrude upon, as Norm's inner turmoil screamed in silence. Suddenly, a rapid series of knocks on the door echoed through the room. "Brother, open up quickly, I'm home. Come help your cutest sister with the door." At the sound of the knocking, Norm immediately set down his snacks and paused the TV drama. Swift as a breeze, he opened the door to find his sister standing there, travel-worn and struggling with a massive suitcase. He promptly took the suitcase from her, thinking he must never neglect this little princess, especially since she was known for her pranks. Norm recalled an incident when, at 1 in the morning, Nomi had stealthily poured water into his pants while he slept, leading him to believe he had wet the bed in his dream. He had washed his underwear quietly at 2:30 in the morning, only to discover that Nomi had secretly filmed him and shared the video with friends and family. For years afterward, every family gathering would see everyone bring up this embarrassing tale. Norm remembered that his parents had called a few days ago, saying, "Your sister's school is on break, so she'll be coming home to stay for a few days." However, he hadn't expected her to return today. After all, he was accustomed to living alone, and apart from his room, the rest of the place was not well kept. Nomi playfully tugged on Norm's ear, teasing, "My foolish brother, why are you so eager to help with my suitcase today? Have you been up to something behind my back?" Her eyes then fell on the snack bag on the coffee table. "Wow, isn't this my favorite snack? You're such a miser, eating it all by yourself." Norm rubbed the ear she had tweaked, smiling wryly at the lively sister before him. He knew that at least until his sister's school reopened, his days of leisure would be over. "Stop fooling around, Nomi," Norm feigned annoyance. "It's not a holiday, so why is your school on break?" Nomi stuck out her tongue and explained, "Haven't you seen the news? I heard from a well-informed friend that this virus is extremely contagious. To prevent a situation where one person's infection could lead to the entire school being affected, the school decided to let us go home and rest first, fearing a recurrence of such an incident." Upon hearing this, Norm's expression turned grave. He moved to the window, drew back the curtains, and took in the view of the streets. The sun had not yet set, casting its remaining rays upon the deserted streets, where many shops still shone with light, but pedestrians were scarce. "Nomi, how much money do you have on you?" Norm inquired, checking his own credit card balance as he did so. "Why do you ask? Are you in a financial pinch? Have you started dating? Come clean." Nomi squinted playfully at Norm. Norm shook his head in resignation, his face growing serious. "No, I believe this virus issue might be more serious than we thought. I just searched online for information about the unknown virus, but I couldn't find any details, which could indicate that the government has clamped down on the news. You know how our country's officials operate, so we should prepare in advance, stock up on more food, just in case." As night descended, the streets of H-City were unusually still, as if even the air had frozen. Under the dim streetlights, Norm and Nomi sat in the living room, discussing the supplies they would need to gather the next day while enjoying a simple dinner. "We must be fully prepared," Norm said calmly, meticulously listing the items on paper: table salt, a substantial supply of drinking water, various canned goods, essential medical supplies, and some over-the-counter medications. A hint of unease flickered in his eyes, yet his pen continued to move across the paper. Nomi nodded in agreement, her usual carefree demeanor replaced by a sense of the gravity of the situation. "We also need masks and disinfectant," she added, her voice betraying a note of tension. "In case we need to go out, these can protect us." Norm looked at his sister with approval, surprised by her maturity and finding some comfort in it. "Good thinking, Nomi," he said, pride evident in his voice. "We'll head out early tomorrow, before others fully grasp the severity of this crisis." They decided to inform their parents of their plan and persuade them to join them in the small town. Although remote, the town offered relative safety, and with their parents nearby, they could look out for one another. Norm picked up his phone and dialed his father's number, detailing the seriousness of the situation at hand. "Dad, I think this virus outbreak might not be something that can be resolved by simply staying at home for protection. All the news about this on the internet has been scrubbed clean, which is hard not to find suspicious. So, you and Mom need to come here as soon as possible." Norm's voice carried a sense of urgency. On the other end of the line, his father, after hearing the explanation, began to understand the gravity of the situation. "We're currently in City A, about 10,000 miles away from you." His father's voice was somber. "I'll book the flights tomorrow and come over with your mother. Son, you're only 20 years old this year. You shouldn't think you have to shoulder everything by yourself." After ending the call, Norm turned his attention to the computer, where he began searching for more information about the virus. "I'll look for some posts about this virus on those underground forums, to see if anyone with insider knowledge might share some information for us to consider." His hands trembled slightly as he typed on the keyboard. Nomi, listening to the tapping of the keys, gazed out the window, lost in thought, not noticing the unusually deep night sky with a full moon hanging high, casting a faint red glow. Late into the night, a blood-red moon loomed in the sky. As Norm slept soundly, a few chilling human screams echoed from afar, piercing and sharp, resounding through the desolate streets. Several wild dogs howled at the blood-red moon, their cries desperate and intense. Suddenly, Nomi let out a scream, jolting awake from her nightmare, her heart racing, her forehead beaded with cold sweat. A knock on the door interrupted the silence, and Norm, with bleary eyes, opened the door, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "What's going on? Why aren't you asleep at this hour?" Nomi, her voice trembling with fear and unease, said, "Brother, I just had a terrible nightmare." She continued, "I dreamt that the end of the world had come, and our parents were killed by a horrifying creature on their way to find us in H-City." Norm gently embraced his sister, offering her soft words of comfort. "You must believe that dreams are the opposite of reality, Nomi. There's no such thing as the end of the world. Look, we're still here, aren't we? All right, get some rest, little Nomi," Norm whispered gently. Nomi pouted, but her expression quickly shifted to one of cunning as she said, "Okay, brother, I want to sleep with you tonight." Norm smiled helplessly, knowing he could never deny his sister's request. "All right, go get your blanket. We're not kids anymore, we can't just cuddle up together like we used to." Nomi bounced up with joy, her mood instantly lifted. "Okay, brother, I'll be right back." The blood moon outside the window still hung high, but the screams had long since faded away. The morning sunlight filtered through the gaps in the curtains, gently sprinkling onto the dining table. After breakfast, they began preparing to go out for shopping. To prevent unforeseen situations, Nomi carefully checked her backpack to ensure it contained essential first aid supplies, a bottle of water, some dry rations, and a multifunctional knife. Norm, on the other hand, checked their communication devices to make sure their cell phones were fully charged and brought along a power bank. They dressed in durable windbreakers and trousers, donned caps and masks. Norm reminded Nomi, "Always be aware of your surroundings when you're outside. If anything seems off, we'll immediately distance ourselves from the crowd." Nomi nodded in understanding. They stepped out of their home and set off for the largest chain supermarket in the area. On the streets, people had already started their busy routines for the new day, but Norm and Nomi remained highly vigilant. They noticed that most people were still carrying out their daily tasks as usual, not taking the news report from yesterday too seriously. Upon arriving at the supermarket, they quickly and methodically began their shopping. Nomi was in charge of purchasing food and daily necessities, while Norm focused on more practical items such as energy sources and tools. They tried to avoid lingering in one place for too long to prevent drawing unnecessary attention. However, due to the sheer volume of their purchases, with each type of food being bought in dozens of boxes, the cashier looked at them with suspicion. Nomi was so nervous that she didn't dare to speak, her fingers unconsciously fiddling with the edge of her clothing. Norm offered the cashier a cigarette, pointed to Nomi's head, and whispered, "She's not quite right in the head, always fearing that the end of the world is coming, so she wants to stock up on supplies." Norm deflected the topic by asking, "By the way, buddy, do you know where I can find any construction workers?" The cashier took the cigarette, his suspicion easing a bit. He nodded, showing understanding, and looked at Nomi with a sympathetic expression. "I understand, in these times, it's better to be prepared," he said. "You're big customers at the market, and we'll deliver these items to your home. As for construction workers, you should ask at the building materials market next door." The siblings breathed a sigh of relief and continued with their shopping. The cashier didn't ask any more questions, diligently scanning each item and calculating the total. After checking out, Norm and Nomi left their purchased supplies at the supermarket with a fake address, waiting for the delivery service. "What did you just say? Why was that cashier looking at me so strangely?" Nomi asked curiously, her fingers tapping on her phone as she prepared to remind her friends to stock up on more supplies. Norm said expressionlessly, "You foolish sister, you're still acting so nervous in this situation. If others really noticed our abnormality, that would be troublesome." They followed the cashier's advice and went to the building materials market next door to find a decoration company to reinforce their house. At the building materials market, Norm carefully observed the surroundings. The ground was cluttered with building materials, and workers were resting on a few planks of wood laid randomly on the ground. Norm carefully compared several decoration companies and chose one that seemed experienced. Looking at the remaining balance of $40,000 on his credit card, Norm said to the person in charge, "I have plenty of money, use the strongest materials for me. Replace the windows with bulletproof glass, and the main door with a metal door, the kind that can't be penetrated by bullets." The person in charge smiled and said, "Boss, all our materials are imported from abroad." He casually took out a stack of documents and said, "Here is the official evaluation, you can take a look. However, boss, someone else ordered these things yesterday, so your renovation will have to wait for a while." Norm casually took out a stack of US dollars and said, "Money is not a problem, the problem is that I need you to start work tomorrow." The person in charge stared at the money in Norm's hand, then said, "No problem, respected customer, you have a need, and I will help. I will call a group of workers to urgently help you with the renovation later." The person in charge was secretly delighted. It's always easy to make money from fools. "I'll just skim a bit off the workers' wages, and I'll make a good profit. It's just right that I recently saw a massage chair online that I liked." After talking with the person in charge, Norm ran to another decoration company and purchased a solar power generator and an automatic water recycling system. On the way home, Nomi and Norm discussed the day's achievements. Nomi said uneasily, "Brother, you only have $40,000, will we be able to pay the bill after they finish the renovation?" Norm comforted her, saying, "Nomi, if something unexpected happens, what's the use of these bills? At that time, everyone will be too preoccupied to care about these bills." Late at night, Norm was counting numbers, his voice gradually becoming faint. 1, 2, 3, 17, 18, oh, I can't do it anymore. Push-ups were too difficult for him, and he felt as if his muscles were being scorched by flames. He collapsed to the ground without any strength, sweat trickling down his forehead and dropping onto the cold floor. He wanted to exercise well during this period, as he usually preferred to lie in bed and immerse himself in the virtual world. Norm stood up and staggered towards the mirror. He gazed at his reflection, and the person in the mirror was as thin as a monkey. He was 5 feet 9 inches tall, with almost no flesh on his body, his ribs faintly visible beneath his skin. He took a deep breath and made a resolution to persist with his exercise. Suddenly, his sister Nomi's scream pierced through the silence. Norm's heart tightened, and he rushed to her room, asking as he ran, "What's wrong?" Nomi was sitting on a computer chair, her face pale, illuminated by the eerie blue light from the computer screen. Norm approached and saw that it was a video from X.com about City M. The video began with a blur, accompanied by piercing screams and chaotic background noise. As the image gradually became clear, Norm's heart began to race. The video showed a bustling supermarket, captured by the supermarket's surveillance camera. In the footage, a figure moved with twisted and bizarre motions, a look of greedy madness on its face. Norm realized that this person was not an ordinary human. In an instant, the figure pounced on another person, tearing and biting frantically. Blood splattered the scene immediately, with chunks of flesh being torn from the body, a sickening sight. Norm felt nauseous, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the brutal scene. At that moment, someone pulled out a handgun and fired several shots at the figure, which fell to the ground. The men who fired the gun tried to reassure everyone, saying, "Please don't panic, I'm a police officer, and that person has been killed," but he didn't notice that the person who had been bitten stood up again. The figure slightly opened its mouth, a string of saliva hanging from the corner, with red-rimmed eyes staring intently at the back of the man's head. The video continued, showing the supermarket's shattered glass door splattered with blood, and behind the door, the fallen shelves and scattered goods on the floor. Suddenly, the video screen went black, followed by a harsh noise. Norm abruptly stood up from the chair, his heart pounding like thunder, cold sweat trickling down his forehead. He knew that this was not just a video, it was a disaster, and they might have become witnesses to this catastrophe. He quickly turned off the computer, and the silence and darkness in the room seemed to overwhelm him in an instant, intensifying his sense of unease. "Nomi," his voice trembled slightly, "we need to start preparing for a possible zombie crisis." Based on the behavior of the zombies in the video, they are not only bloodthirsty but also fast and incredibly strong. This unknown virus may have already infected many people. If the situation spirals out of control, we could soon face a global nightmare. City A is only a few hundred miles away from City M, a thought that made Norm's heart tighten. He quickly picked up his phone and dialed his father's number, but there was only a long wait and silence on the other end, with no one answering. "Brother," Nomi's voice interrupted his thoughts, her eyes filled with panic, "you have to see the latest news." Norm turned to look at the TV, his fingers trembling as he pressed the remote control. The news anchor's face was pale, and his voice was urgent. "We are receiving more reports from City M, and the situation is worse than we thought. The spread of this to immediately take refuge, avoid going out, and wait for rescue." The atmosphere in the room congealed, and Norm and Nomi exchanged a glance, both seeing the fear and unease in each other's eyes. Norm took a deep breath, quickly walked to the window, and lifted a corner of the curtain to peer outside. The streets were chaotic with hundreds of residents desperately looting food and medicine from the supermarket, punctuated by the sound of gunfire and screams. Norm and Nomi shared another look, grateful for the foresight to have prepared all the supplies they needed. The food they had stockpiled would last them for years, but their home had not yet been fortified. Fortunately, they had given the supermarket staff a false address, so they didn't have to worry about others coming to their door due to a lack of food. Just then, the telephone rang, breaking the silence. It was their father returning their call. Norm quickly answered, and his father's voice was hoarse and urgent on the other end. "Norm, Nomi, we're trying to find a way to get home, but all flights have been cancelled. We might need to find another way back. You two must protect yourselves, don't go out, and we'll reunite with you as soon as possible." After ending the call, Norm felt an unprecedented pressure. He and Nomi began to act, checking the security of every room, sealing all possible entrances, leaving only one emergency exit. Once they had done all this, Norm said to Nomi with a serious expression, "We are over 10,000 miles away from City M, and the people nearby have started to become chaotic due to food shortages. The pressure on our father must be immense, especially since the city where he is located is right next to City M, with the crisis of scarce food and the zombie threat. Norm let out a deep sigh and sent a text message to his father, "May God bless you and me." As night fell, the screams and chaos outside gradually subsided, replaced by an unsettling silence. Norm and Nomi sat in the dimly lit living room, with only a small nightlight casting a faint glow and throwing long shadows. Norm's voice broke the silence, a hint of helplessness in his words. "Nomi, I think we should start planning for the future. After all, this isn't a world from an online novel where we'll suddenly gain superpowers and save the world," his voice echoed in the dim living room. Nomi listened quietly, her eyes shining with trust and reliance on Norm. She nodded, her gaze resolute as she replied, "I know, brother. We will get through this together. Firstly, we need to ensure our safety," Norm continued. "Fortunately, this house is on the edge of the town, with no neighbors nearby, but the problem is that the house is made of wood, which means it's difficult for us to fend off danger." He took out a piece of paper and began listing the things they needed to do: reinforce doors and windows, install protective railings, prepare self-defense weapons, such as knives, clubs, or even repurposed household items, develop an escape plan in case their refuge is breached, learn basic self-defense techniques to deal with potential close-quarters combat. Try not to turn on the lights at home every day, Norm added. "We don't know how the situation outside will develop, nor do we know the behavior patterns of the zombies." Nomi nodded, a glint of determination in her eyes. "By the way, brother, I've seen in online novels that in a post-apocalyptic environment, humans can be just as terrifying. Without food, they might even resort to cannibalism." Norm smiled slightly, reassured by his sister's resilience in a world full of unknowns and dangers. "In addition to these immediate concerns, we should also consider long-term survival plans, as no one knows how long this crisis will last," Norm went on. "We need to find a sustainable food source, such as growing vegetables or hunting wild animals." His gaze became profound. "We could also try to find other survivors and establish a community," Norm said eagerly. "By the way, do you remember our childhood friend? Give Brother John a call, he's strong and would be a great help to us." Nomi nodded, her expression serious. She quickly took out her phone and searched for John's number. At this moment, the internet had already been thrown into chaos by the news, filled with bone-chilling zombie videos. These videos documented the horrific deaths of people under the brutal attacks of zombies. Every screen was filled with screams, blood, and chaos. In a dimly lit office, a man was hunched over his desk when his furious boss approached and barked, "Hey, you good for nothing, why aren't you working yet?" The boss grabbed the man by the collar, slamming him to the ground, and angrily said, "I'm paying you to work, not to slack off." The man lifted his head, revealing sharp teeth and blood-red eyes that stared menacingly at the obese and greasy boss. In the prisons, the situation was even more dire. Due to centralized management, the prisons had turned into bloody slaughterhouses. The screams and wails of the inmates echoed within the prison walls. The video footage showed the zombies, initially stiff and pale with gaunt bodies, undergoing mutations after feeding on humans. They grew larger and moved with exceptional agility, casually tearing through the prison's iron bars and savoring one delicious meal after another. In the heavily infected area of City M, a young man, his wife, and their young child were trapped. The man's post was filled with despair. "We are trapped here by zombies, and we haven't had anything to eat for several days. My wife can no longer produce milk due to malnutrition, and our child cries incessantly from hunger. We don't know how much longer we can hold on. If anyone can see my post, please remember that zombies are a force that cannot be fought against, and they can evolve. Just yesterday, I witnessed a zombie with wings." The phone call connected, and the dial tone was strikingly loud in the silent living room. Nomi held her phone nervously, her fingers trembling slightly from anxiety. Norm's brows were furrowed with worry. Finally, the familiar voice of John came through the phone. "Brother John, are you all right? It's me, Nomi. Nomi's voice was urgent. We have stockpiled a lot of food. You should come to our place as soon as possible. Nomi, are you both together? John's voice was initially joyful, but it quickly turned tense and urgent. This damn world, I'm in H-City now too. Do you need a weapon? I have a handgun at home, but not many bullets. After ending the call, Norm and Nomi shared a smile, feeling a sense of relief they hadn't felt in a long time. They bid each other good night and went to sleep. Late at night, a blood moon hung in the sky, casting an eerie red glow over the earth. The red light shone through the window, a sinister omen that seeped into Norm's room. Norm lay in bed, surrounded by silence, with only the occasional sound of the wind outside the window. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his arm, as if a tiny needle had pierced his skin. At first, he thought it was just a mosquito bite, but soon, the pain became intense, like fire burning beneath his skin, spreading throughout his body. Norm's body began to contort due to the pain, cold sweat beading on his forehead, his face twisted in an indescribable expression of agony. His body trembled, muscles taut, as if fighting against some force within. His fingers clutched the bedsheet, knuckles white from the effort, veins in his arms bulging, breathing rapid and heavy, each breath feeling like a weight pressed against his chest, making it almost impossible to draw air. As time passed second by second, the pain began to change, becoming numb and heavy, like a cold snake flowing through his bloodstream, slowly invading his brain. His heart raced, the roar of blood pounding in his ears, his vision blurred, and everything in the room began to warp. Norm felt an unprecedented fear, a thought flashing through his mind: zombie virus. He wanted to cry out for help, but his voice was stuck in his throat, only a hoarse whisper escaping. As time went on, Norm's consciousness swayed between confusion and clarity. He felt the virus within him seeking control, but each attempt was repelled by his strong will. Finally, as dawn approached, Norm felt a warm force welling up from his heart, beginning to dispel the virus. His muscles relaxed, the heavy numbness gradually fading, replaced by an unprecedented vitality. When the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains and fell on Norm's face, he opened his eyes. His nearsightedness was gone, and the world was no longer blurry and distorted but clear and bright. His body felt incredibly light. Norm stood up and walked to the mirror, noticing a faint golden glow in his eyes. His once thin body was now filled with muscles, as if he had been working out for over a decade. Norm felt as if his veins were filled with fire rather than blood. His reflexes were faster, his senses sharper. He took a deep breath, feeling the power within him that seemed capable of breaking through walls, filled with confusion. I haven't come into contact with anyone, but why was I infected? Suddenly, he thought of Nomi. Panicking, Norm rushed to Nomi's room, knocking urgently on the door. After a long period of no response, he kicked the door open without hesitation. Inside the room, the bloodstains on the walls and floor had dried, and Norm's heart pounded fiercely in his chest. His gaze fell on a note beside Nomi's bed, seemingly left in a hurry. The handwriting on the note was messy, but Norm could still make out the words: "Brother, I must leave. I might be infected, and I don't want to put you at risk. Please forgive me, I have to face this alone." Norm picked up his phone, intending to call Nomi, but as soon as he unlocked it, hundreds of unread messages and dozens of missed calls from his parents popped up. What the hell? What happened last night? Norm's mind was filled with countless questions. Wait, how are all these messages from a month ago? Startled, Norm opened his phone state settings, and the screen displayed May 15, 2024. Could it be that I've been asleep for an entire month? Norm stared in disbelief at the phone screen. His gaze swept the room once more before finally resting on the window. The window was slightly ajar, with a cold breeze blowing in, bringing with it the scent of the outside world. Norm walked to the window and looked out. The view was desolate, the streets were empty, with only the sound of withered leaves rustling in the wind. Norm took a deep breath, resolved to find Nomi. He knew it would be a dangerous journey, but he couldn't just give up. He quickly put on his coat, checked his pockets for keys and some essentials, and then stepped out of the door. The world outside was even more desolate than he had imagined. The entire town was shrouded in an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional chirping of birds. Norm walked cautiously down the street, vigilant for any potential threats. His eyes scanned the surrounding houses and buildings, looking for any signs of life. Suddenly, he noticed that a door to a house not far away seemed to have been gently pushed open, a subtle clue that someone might have passed by recently. Norm's heart raced as he approached the house cautiously. He gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was in disarray, with furniture scattered and claw marks on the walls. Patches of blood stained the floor, and all signs indicated that a fierce struggle had taken place here. A sense of foreboding filled Norm's heart, and he quickened his pace, heading towards the basement of the house. The basement was dimly lit, and a cold, musty smell assaulted his nostrils as he descended the stairs. At the bottom, he saw a figure huddled in a corner, their back turned to him. The figure was trembling, and Norm could hear faint voice. "Nomi," Norm called out hesitantly, his voice echoing in the quiet basement. The figure turned around, and to his surprise,